In this episode, habits that have helped me as a writer and will hopefully help you. Hi, I'm Herne, author of Fires of the Dead, and this is Daily Writing Advice. So, I should preface this by saying, I'm very new to this whole author game. Fires of the Dead is my first published book, and I am still learning in this process. I am by no means an expert, so take this with a grain of salt. But the habits that I'm going to talk about in this episode have helped me write 3 novels, not including this one, which are currently unpublished, this novella, which is published, a bunch of short stories, a lot of which have been published, and has allowed me to have a lot of fun with my writing, and has allowed me to put stuff out into the world that has had fairly decent reactions to it. So these are habits that might not necessarily work for you, but I think it's useful if I just talk about them a bit, and maybe you can pull out 1 or 2 that will be amazing for you and that will hopefully make you a much better writer. So the first habit, which I found really critical, is writing every day. And for me, consistency, I found, has been massive to my process. Whenever I've gone too long away from writing, I've really struggled to get back into it. And I think it's one of those things that, in the same way with your health, which is ironic because I've got a cold right now, so probably not in the healthiest state, but doing something all the time is a lot easier to maintain, in my opinion, rather than doing it in bursts, dropping away, doing it in bursts, dropping away. And if you think about exercise, it's much easier to stay in shape rather than get back into shape. So consistency has been key for me with Fires of the Dead, because I had a lot of stuff to do in the launching of this, from designing the cover, because I self-published this book, to doing all of the uploading, the paperback, the hardback, the ebook, the audiobook, all of that stuff. It meant that I went for quite a few weeks without actually writing or editing a project. And it was probably the longest break I've had from actual writing or editing in, I would say, probably like maybe 4 to 5 years. And it was great because I really wanted to get Fires of the Dead in its best possible form out into the world. And I don't regret it, because it was great to get Fires of the Dead out into the world. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and it's been getting some amazing reviews, which has been really awesome. But it made it hard to get back into the editing for Masks of Steel, which is the project that I'm working on at the moment. And so I've kind of made a bit of a resolution for myself moving forward from this. And that resolution is to always write or edit every day, even if it's just 20 minutes, even if it's just half an hour, even if I've got busy stuff going on, I can surely carve out just a little bit of time to work on the writing. And the point being there is not so much to actually get progress on the project that you're working on, although that will happen, but it's to keep those mental muscles going so that you are not degrading your ability to write well, and that you can be consistent in putting out good stories and consistently thinking about your stories. Because that's the other thing to being a write everyday author, is it means that the story is always going to be there in your head, and you'll hopefully always be thinking about it, and then your subconscious can do some of the heavy lifting. Habit number 2 is tracking. So I'm a bit of a maths nerd, and I have a big Excel spreadsheet where I track all of the words that I've written for, I would say, probably over a year and a half. And basically what I just do is I log, the word count for every day. I also have a timer to record how long I worked on writing every day. If I'm just doing something like revision, I would just type in the time I spent on the revision process, and then I would type revision next to that in a box. And this is really cool because it helps with that habit of consistency. Because when you have a chain of 12, 20, 50 days in a row of editing something, you don't want to break that chain. And I found for me that what gets measured really gets managed, and it gets optimized. So by actually tracking how much writing I'm doing, it just gives me that extra little incentive to, keep writing every day. And also, it's really rewarding after doing this for half a year to see how much you actually write, because you might be in a tough point within your writing journey, within the first draft, within the 10th draft, wherever you're at, and it can be hard to kind of see the forest for the trees. So having a tracker lets you actually see how much you've done, and lets you realize that, even if you had a bad writing day today and you only got 200 words out, well, over the last year, maybe you've written 80,000 words or something like that. And that just gives you more motivation to continue with the writing. Habit number 3 is writing by hand. So I am a big fan of journals. I have one here right now, and I find that writing by hand for some reason actually helps me generate more ideas. So I'll quite often open my notebook and just start writing a very short idea I had down. So maybe I had, just like a one sentence, one liner piece of dialogue that I wanted to write down. And that's all I think I'm going to write down. I put it in the notebook, and some weird alchemy happens where it turns into 5 sentences and the ideas just seem to spring forth from the page. And it's like there's this weird symbiosis between putting your ideas down on paper and the paper actually giving your ideas back to you with interest. And sometimes this happens if I'm just typing on a computer, but I find for me at least, I don't know why, it tends to happen more when I'm writing it by hand. And it's remarkable how consistent this is for me. Even if I don't think that there's any possibility of expanding an idea I put down, if I start putting it down on paper, things tend to come back in larger quantities than I expected. So I would definitely encourage all writers to have some sort of notebook to jot down ideas. Number 4 is not over-focusing on tactics. So there's this great anecdote about Stephen King, does a lot of talks or whatever, and one of the most common questions he gets asked, and I don't actually know if this is true, this is just an anecdote I've heard people say, one of the most common questions that is asked to Stephen King, arguably one of the most prolific writers of our age, is, Mr. King, what pencil do you use? And this is ridiculous, because just knowing what pencil someone uses won't allow you to write the same way they do. And this just reflects a kind of an obsession that is probably as old as time, of tactics rather than strategies. So tactics are kind of those micro tools, techniques, actions that you're doing that somehow allow you to be more efficient, more prolific, more whatever. Strategies are kind of the macro, overall plans you're using to get to a destination. So a tactic might be, you have to do all your writing in Scrivener, which is a program I love. I do a lot of my writing in Scrivener. That's a tactic, right? It's a tool that you can use. But ultimately, we shouldn't confuse tactics and strategies. Strategies is like, you have to read a lot and write a lot. And if you do both of those things enough and consistently and every day, you're going to have books at the end of it. That's a strategy, right? It's giving you kind of a point to get to. It's giving you the compass and it's saying go. Tactics is like, this is how you adequately scale a mountain in case you come across a mountain on your quest here. And that might be really useful if you need to go across a mountain. But if you don't need to go across the mountain, you've sort of wasted a lot of energy worrying about this thing. So when people are giving you writing advice, myself included, take it with a grain of salt. If it's a tactic, it might be useful to implement, but it's not going to allow you to have a quick hack or, quick fix solution to the wider, longer, more difficult problem of producing novels, which are by their nature a long marathon and not a short sprint that can be hacked with certain tools or techniques. Number 5 is reading a lot. I've read about 40-ish books this year. It was about 60 books last year, so I don't know, hopefully we'll hit that same target this year. And I find that reading is just so critical for being a writer. And I know that sounds like kind of stupidly obvious to say, but it does surprise me how many, aspiring writers don't actually read a lot and they expect to write a lot and write good. I think there's an argument to be said for the whole, I don't want to read because then it corrupts my originality. I could not personally disagree with that more. I think that the more you read, the more original you become because you've seen what people have done before and it allows you to kind of make your own path through the established books which are out there in the world. And then number 6 is convincing myself that what I'm doing doesn't really matter. When you're getting through the first draft of a book, it's very difficult sometimes to overcome that fear of judgment because putting a book out into the world can be scary because you're worried about how people will judge your words, you're worried about whether what you wrote down sounds trite, you're worried about maybe you have talked big about how good this book's going to be to people and maybe it's not coming together that amazingly. And for me, the first draft is always just something that I've sort of promised to never show anyone else. It's something that my focus is just getting the words down on the page. It doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter if it's good. It's just about getting it down on the page and kind of keeping up this delusion throughout the entire writing process. I find really useful because ultimately you can't know how people are going to judge your work. But you can know that if you are afraid of how people will judge your work, you probably won't get the work out there in the first place. So just convincing yourself that the words you're putting down on the page don't ultimately really matter. I find that to be a counterintuitive but useful piece of writing advice that has helped me over the years. So I hope those bits of writing advice have helped you. Again, this is not a prescriptive lesson. I'm not saying that you have to do these 6 things to be an amazing writer. You could do the exact opposite of them and you would maybe still be successful or whatever. These have just worked for me, and I'm sure over the next couple of years, and decades, hopefully, I will evolve the advice that I implement. I will evolve the habits that I'm giving myself, and I can't wait to share that with you as well. So that is our episode. Now it's your turn to go and write extraordinary stories. See you next time.